Y'all take a look in that feed trough. You're gonna see that there's corn in the troughs. And so I do have a little bit of corn sitting in storage. And I took a look at the animals and I've decided that it's okay to feed the animals straight corn. You know, the whole thing about straight corn, the whole thing about straight corn is that corn is effectively just a source of energy. It's very low protein. And I don't suggest feeding an animal that's not preconditioned. If you know, these animals have all been preconditioned for a very thorough period of time, right? A majority of these animals have been preconditioned for a very long time. They've been weaned for a very long time, and I've had them on grass and I've had them on a total mixed ration. And the whole thing about feeding an animal corn is that if the animal is not if the animal has not been the rumen has not been developed thoroughly, I would not suggest feeding your animal corn. I would not suggest feeding your animal straight corn. If you feed your animal straight corn and they don't have a well-developed rumen, there is a very high possibility that they end up with a severe level of acidosis. All right, a very severe level of acidosis. But these animals, if you take a look at them, I mean, and I've been taking care of these animals for a good bit of time, right? I took care of these animals and then I let them back out here, and these animals, I took a look at them and I've determined that it's effectively okay as of right now to feed the animals straight corn. So I'm feeding them straight corn in the morning, and then I'm feeding them a little bit of straight distiller grains in the evening, and that's as a supplement for their feed. I got a little bit of the bigger animals, the two biggest animals have a lot of flies on them, and so I put some permethrin dust on their backs. I had a lot of flies on them, on just those big animals, and so I got a good bit of flies on this one too, but he won't let me get close enough to him. But these these animals, they're all effectively good to go. And I was actually taking a look at it yesterday, and in terms of everything that's been going on, okay, so here's what's been going on with this. Okay, it's okay. So we're about at the end of April, right? We're about at the beginning of May. And I started the year off with about 35 animals, right? I started the year off with 35 animals. And then I sold 14, 15 animals. And then I bought a 26 or something like that. So far this year, I've actually had about 70 animals so far. So far this year, I've taken care of about 70 animals. And out of those 70 animals, I only had 3 animals die. So, I've been taking care of 70 animals, and I've talked about this in terms of a bigger perspective. But when I'm looking at something like a stabilized herd, when I have a stabilized herd, the death loss will be somewhere between 5 and 7%. And then the death loss on a very high risk herd, in terms of bringing in new calves, and I have a high risk herd, the death loss on a high risk herd will be substantially higher than on a herd like this, right? But here's the thing, in terms of the whole thing, all right, the stabilized herd, the unstabilized herd, me running my business, taking a look at my herd for what it is, I've ran about 70 animals this year so far, and I've only lost 3 out of the whole thing. The high risk animals and the low risk animals combined. So out of 70 animals, I've only lost 3. And so, I was taking a look at this whole thing, and I am actually in the net positive, drastically in the net positive on all of my animals. Even these little small ones. If I took this little small one to the sale barn, I would make money. I'm actually in the net positive on all of my animals. My cost of gains have been significantly lower. Over the last month, over the last 30 days, I've only put about $450 into my business. I legitimately only put $450 into my business. And, my business is making me, a lot of money, all right? I don't even know how much money I make. I make a lot. And, and another way to look at this is over the next about month and a half, I got these big animals here, right? You can see the big ones. These animals will probably, 1, 2, 3, and then I got that red heifer over there. Those 4 animals will be going to the sale barn here in about 2 weeks. And then I have another 15 animals that are going to be going to the sale barn probably within another month and a half, another month. Right? I'll be selling 19 animals in the next month and a half, and they're all going to be big. They're all going to be real big animals. Like, you know, you can take a look at this animal right here, right? This is what I would say, you know, in terms of if when I take an animal to the market, this is how I want them to look, right? He's a little bit fat. I mean, he's a good bit fat, but he's not like he's not like waddling around. You know, if your cattle start waddling around, that's a sign that they're too fat. All right, but he's not waddling around. I mean, he can still move around, but when you take a look at him, you can tell that he's fat, right? That's very good. I would say he's probably about 775 pounds, 750 pounds. This one, that one, that one. And then I got the small little red heifer. Well, I mean, I'm not calling her small, but she's got a smaller frame. And and I will tell you, I will tell you the truth, okay? I have spent about $400, maybe about $410 on my business over the last 30 days. And over the next month, my business will make almost like a $38,000. All right, I take the $400 out of the $38,000 that I make. I don't care about $400. That's the whole idea, right? The whole thing about running a business is to make money, right? Is to be in the net positive. And when I take a look at my herd, I've ran about 70 animals this year, and I've only lost 3 out of the whole herd. Legitimately, out of all of my animals, I started the year with about 35 animals. I sold about 15, and then I bought about 25. I've had about 70 animals this year, and I've only lost 3 out of 70. I've had 70 animals this year, and I don't want to give myself bad juju, right? I don't want to give myself bad juju, but that's what the numbers are right now. Out of 70 animals, I lost 3. My balance sheet is so far in the net positive that I don't even know how much money I make. When I sell these 45 animals, I will probably make enough money to buy 85 animals, 2 loads of grain, a load of fertilizer, and I will still probably have, $1,000 or $2,000 left over. And if I legitimately need money, I can sell one of my 85 animals. All right, I can sell one of my 85 animals. It does not matter. All right, why would I sit around with, $1 million in cash? Why would I do that? Right, I wouldn't do that. That's a worthless idea. It's not a good idea. Right, what's that going to do? It's not going to do anything. Right, why would I sit around with, whatever, right? Why would I sit around with, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash? Why would I do that? It's not going to do anything, right? It's not going to do anything. And here's the, and the whole thing about this is that, if we talk about $100,000, I would actually say that my revenue goes over 100 grand in the next month for the year, and my earnings are actually compounding upwards. And I've already talked about my earnings. When I make money, I take that money and I convert that money into a tax deductible asset that I knowledgeably appraise, right? I take a look at an asset and I trade the money for the asset. And why do I do that? Because when I do that, it is all the same thing, granted that I appraised the asset properly. It's all the same thing, all right? And when you appraise the value of an asset, you are making money via an unrealized gain. That's how you make large amounts of money, all right? Millions of dollars a year. That's how you do it. Billions probably. That's how the rich people do it. That's how I do it. All right, you get a tax benefit for purchasing your assets. You appreciate the value of your asset. And when you do that, you don't have to pay taxes on those gains unless you liquidate your asset. And granted that you have a good asset, you should be able to liquidate your asset whenever you feel like it. More or less. I mean, more or less, real estate does not sell instantaneously. But if you have a piece of real estate and you have money in your piece of real estate, you can go to the bank, have it appraised, and get a line of credit against it. Then you can access your money anyway. All right, you can access your money anyway. All right, it's all the same thing, okay? And I got the tiny little Charolais calf that I was saying he's a little bit sick. Or he looked a little bit wonky. I'm not going to say he was sick. He was looking a little bit wonky. And yesterday I was following him around to take a good look at him because he was just kind of not looking good. And I was following him around and he took a poop right in front of me. And when he took that poop, I realized that his manure is clumping up real hard. And so I got him separated in the preconditioning pen, and I put him on a ration of alfalfa and a 15% protein commodity pellet. So I mixed a 15% protein commodity pellet with some alfalfa, and I gave it to him, and I mixed it 1-to-1 in terms of the volume, not in terms of weight. In terms of volume. And so the commodity pellet probably weighed 2 times as much as the alfalfa, 3 times as much as the alfalfa. But he's also got grass in that preconditioning pen. He can walk around and chew on the grass, and so I'm not too worried about the roughage material. And so, okay, but I put him in and I figured out what it was, is that he's having a hard time digesting food. And I talked about this in terms of the little tiny calves. And this calf is he's a very timid little calf. He's very timid. He doesn't really like to get up on the feed bunk and eat, and he's kind of unsure of himself. But I mean, he's not sick, okay? He's just a very timid little calf. He's been like that for a long time. And it's okay, I just know that I need to, keep a good eye on that animal, make sure he's eating. But I'm not too worried about it, okay? He eats plenty of food. I've just noticed, but you see these big calves, when, you really, the calves that push the other animals out the way, and they really get after it, and they eat the food, they're the ones that get the biggest, okay? They get the biggest, and they, but every once in a while, you'll end up with a timid little calf. And if you have a timid little calf, you have to really take care of that animal. This is also another timid little calf. She's also very timid. She's she's kind of unsure of herself, and she doesn't really want to go into the bunk and eat. And, but, I keep a good eye on the timid ones, all right? I make sure, like when the animals are eating, and that's also why I got a lot of bunk space, all right? It's important to have a lot of bunk space, because the big ones will push the timid ones out of the way, and then the big ones will eat. And so it's important to have a lot of bunk space, because once the big ones start eating, you can I just kind of walk around the animals, and I push the timid ones onto their own feed bunk, right? Because you'll have all these calves, and the big ones, once they start eating, they'll just eat until the food is gone, and then I'll walk around the area, and I'll push the timid ones onto their own separate feed bunk, and then they'll eat together. And so, that's how I do that. But it's very important to have a lot of bunk space, all right? It's very important to have a lot of bunk space. If you don't have a lot of bunk space, the big ones will just push the timid ones out of the way. And so, but I got these, I got the small animals. I got the animal that I thought was gonna die. He's probably about 80% better, 85% better. And then that little Charolais calf that was looking a little bit wonky, I put him I put them both in a preconditioning pen by themselves, and I put them on a ration of alfalfa and a commodity pellet. And okay, so in terms of what I got going on right now, in terms of my what am I doing right now, this Sunday I'm gonna go and take a look at that property. I got a piece of property that I'm looking at, and when I go and I take a look at that piece of property, if I even relatively like the property, I will put it under a contract, okay? And my big idea right now is that, I'm looking to get, okay, so I was thinking about the deal, all right? I was thinking about the deal. I was taking a look at it, and I was like, I've taken a look at a flood map. The property is not in a flood zone. I mean, it's 95% of it is not in a flood zone. And so I was taking a look at this property, and I've determined that I will offer them their price. I will give them their price, but I want them to give me a 5-month or a 6-month, lease contract. I want them to give me a 6-month lease contract, and then I'm going to put a contingency on that property for them to have to dig a well and to pump water. If they do not hit water, then I will not buy the property. My big problem with, buying land out in the middle of nowhere is that if you don't have water, you're kind of boned. All right, and you don't really want to be in a situation where you're entirely reliant on pond water, because the whole thing about pond water is that when it starts to hit about 85 degrees, the animals will go into the water. They will sit in the water, and they will poop and pee in the water, and they'll sit in the water because it cools them off when it's hot outside. And when they start doing that, the water will rot very quickly. The water will turn nasty very quickly. And if the water starts to turn nasty and the animals are drinking it, and that's their only water, they will start getting sick on that water. All right, and so, I don't really want to be in a situation where I am completely reliant on pond water. But, if you dig a dugout, like if you dig a big old hole, like, somewhere, away from the cattle, and then you pump the water out of that pond, then sure, then you can use that water. But, My whole situation is that I need water. Okay, I need access to clean water, and I'm gonna put a contingent. I've been thinking about the deal, right? I've been thinking about the deal. It's a very small piece of it's a very small deal. All right, it's gonna be about whatever, $500,000. It's not a lot of money. Okay, it's not a lot of money. And so the big idea for me right now is to take is for the deal. I will want better terms. I will offer them their price, but I want better terms. I will give you your money if you give me better terms. All right, give me a 5-month lease on your property and a contingency for you to dig the well. If you dig the well and you hit water, you have to hit water. If you do not hit water, I will not buy the property. That's effectively the deal that I will offer them. I will go and take a look at the property on Sunday. And if I even relatively like the property, I will just go ahead with the deal. Because here's the thing, in terms of $500,000, I haven't really, I have to go and talk to the banker about it and take a look at the whole situation. But $500,000, I may be able to just write a check. All right, I may be able to. I will go and I will talk to the banker about it. But for $500,000, I may be able to just pay for the whole thing with the money that I have. I may be able to just write him a check. I will have to go and talk to the banker, and see what's going on with my investments, and get my investments appraised, and take a look at the equity evaluation of my but if I whatever, but I can whatever, I'll ask them if they'll give me a line of credit against my herd, right? I have animals and I don't really want to liquidate them because I am appreciating the value of the animals. And if they give me a line of credit against my herd and they give me a line of credit against my investments, I may have enough equity to just write a check. I may be able to just pay for it cash. All right, I may be able to, or I will get very close. But then, the whole thing about this is like, I could do that, but, I could also, go and take I've been talking about the government loan, right? The government offers very good loans. The government offers very good loans for buying farmland. They offer 40-year terms at very, very, very low interest rates. And they even secure commercial loans and drop your interest rate. And so I have to go around and talk to the different bankers, right? I've talked about this a lot. Go and talk to multiple bankers. All right, don't just ask one banker. Don't take my word for it. Go and ask your bankers. I mean, there are multiple bankers. All right, go to a banker from that bank. Go to a banker from that bank. Oh, this bank over here secures, or the interest rate for the bank over here is determined by this bond, and this bank over here, their interest rate is determined by that bond, and this bank over here, their interest rate is determined on that bond. Bank number 1 offers a 25-year term. Bank number 2 offers a 20-year term, and bank number 3 offers a 40-year term, and et cetera, right? I mean, go and ask multiple bankers. Don't just ask one. All right, talk to multiple bankers, figure out what their interest rates are, figure out what their lending terms are. Some bankers will even lend you 80% of your money. All right, and I'm not suggesting that you go and take in for farmland, and I'm not suggesting that you go and leverage 80% of your income to buy a piece of property. I'm not suggesting that, but you have to understand that does happen. I have legitimately talked to one banker, and the banker flat out told me that they would be willing to leverage 80% of my income. So if you want to buy a property, and let's say you want to buy a 20 acre field, right? And whatever, I mean, whatever, but I have spoken to a banker, legitimately honest, from the best of my recollection. I have spoken to a banker that legitimately offered an 80% loan leverage. They will leverage 80% of your income. If you make $25,000 a month, they will leverage you for $20,000. All right, they would be willing to do it. I mean, I'm sure that you would have to present a very, very, very good deal for them to do it, but they told me that they would be willing to do it. All right, and I'm not suggesting that you go and leverage 80% of your income. In terms of an overall situation, right? Here's a very, I will tell you about my balance sheet. How much leverage do I use in terms of the totality of my balance sheet? I use about maybe 20%. All right, if I make $5, I save $4 and I use $1. And when I save that money, I buy assets. All right, I buy assets because it's all the same thing, and I get a tax benefit. And I can actually knowledgeably appreciate the value of that asset. All right, that, and another way to look at this is that, me, when I make money, I grow the size of my business with almost all of it, nearly all of it. And in terms of a broader sense, I also leverage those earnings. Like, if you take a look at my income and you take a look at how much money I make, I leverage about 125 to 150% of my income on a yearly basis, but I keep my balance sheet leverage under a 1-to-1 ratio all the time. I appreciate my assets. I have unrealized gains in my assets. I have my income, which are two separate things, right? I was talking about this yesterday. They are two separate things. My income and my balance sheet are two separate things, all right? They are two completely different things. So I can leverage 150% of my income, 125% of my income, but only be leveraged against 75% of my balance sheet. And if I'm leveraged against 75% of my balance sheet, I can pay off all of my debts whenever I feel like it. And I would still have money left over, right? But in terms of my income, I now have a negative income, which gives me a very good tax benefit. It gives me a very good tax benefit. My taxes are effectively zero all the time. I'm not talking about tax evasion. I'm not talking about doing something illegal. This is how the game is played. This is how you play the game. I don't make the rules. All right, if you don't like the system, then you're gonna have to change it for everybody. And in terms of a reality perspective, farming is almost impossible for everybody already. Just because I do very well at it does not mean that you oh my God, now it's unfair. I play the same game as everybody. If you want to go and you want to start yourself a farm and you want to make $35,000 a month, then go and do it. Nobody's stopping you. Let's see if you can even do 10%. All right, you can't just look at somebody like me and go, oh my God, it's unfair. Oh my God, it's unfair. You can't. That's not morally correct. I play the same game as everybody else. If you want to change the rules for me, you will have to change the rules for everybody. And farming is already very difficult, almost impossible for everybody to begin with. I have some of the best results you could ever imagine. All right, just because I do well does not mean you cannot change the rules for me. Just me. That's morally unjust. All right, but I am telling you how to play the game. If you purchase a tax deductible asset and you have a business and you talk to your accountant about it, I said talk to your accountant about it. Find an accountant that knows what they're doing and ask your accountant. Ask 3, 4, 5 accountants. Call different ones and talk to them about your business. Find one that specifically specializes in your line of work. And then ask them about your tax burdens. Ask them about your tax credits. Ask them about your tax situation. Ask them. Don't take my word for it. I'm just here to put you in this is the stuff that I do. This is how I do it. All right. I actually do this stuff in real life. All right. But I actually do this stuff, okay? And I'm not giving you advice, trust me, I don't care, all right? I'm telling you how I do it, all right? And the whole big thing about this is that, in terms of my situation, if somebody told me this when I was 20, I would have been amazed. Thank you for this wonderful information, all right? It would have been incredible to know this stuff earlier, right? It would have been incredible. I had to figure all of this stuff out by myself. All right, I had to figure this stuff all out, and it took me a long time. And I'm giving you everything, everything that I learned, and at the end of the day, I actually do it. I make a massive amount of money. I don't even know how much money I make. In all honesty, $500,000, I may be able to just write a check. That's the situation that I'm in. I may be able to just write a check. I will have to go and talk to the banker about it. All right, appraise my assets, give me a line of credit, and I'm going to see how much equity I have. And I can just I may be able to. But if the government will give me a loan on a 40-year term for a very low interest rate, then I would rather just do that, right? Why would I write a check with a 8% interest rate, with a 7% interest rate, if I can just borrow the whole thing, right? If I can just borrow the whole thing at 4.5%, at 5% on 40-year term, right? But that's the whole situation, and I was talking about this yesterday, the whole thing, but you'd be surprised, you'd be surprised. And I talk about this in terms of my perspective, you would be surprised by the idiocy. But and I've already said that the average person holds the answer to 99% of the world's problems. All right, the average person does. And here's the thing: you would be surprised by the idiocy, the kind of stuff that I see. You would be amazed by it. You would be amazed. It's almost borderline, like what, it's almost incredible. Like I did not think that it was even possible to be that moronic. But you would be surprised by the things that you see. My life is a journey. I fell out of heaven a 7. Nothing to show for it. Massive levels of some massive levels of problems. A bunch of opinions. You would be surprised. Because it's almost borderline incredible. Because the thing is, like, when I do these things, I actually show you that I do it. I show you that I do it. I don't, when you take a look at how much money I make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on a 10.5-acre field running commercial cattle. A couple 100,000, maybe even 300,000 on a commercial cattle farm on a 10.5-acre field. Granted that I also have another lease property, and that lease property is 40 acres. So I farm 50 acres and I make like $400,000 a year. That's my take-home pay. That's not how much money I make, and then I pay taxes, and then I bring home about $400,000 a year doing this, right? And I even show you, and I legitimately show you everything. Right, and I've always said, and if you know somebody that does better than me, then let me see this person. Right, let me see this person. Legitimately, let me see this person, right? Because I have not seen anybody do 10% to this day. And in terms of money, if we're going to talk about money, let's say that, and I was talking about, you would be surprised if you offered somebody a very small amount of money. And I talk about this in terms of a reality perspective. This is a line that I do not cross. I do not pay people to sell their soul to the devil. I don't do it. That's something that I refuse to cross that line. I will not do it. But you would be surprised if you offer somebody a very small amount of money, like $100,000, what you can get them to do. Legitimately, a minuscule amount of money. I can make $100,000 in a month. If the big idea was I legitimately need $100,000, I could go to the bank right now and get $100,000, no problem. Right, I can make 100. The whole idea is not maximizing your cash position. It is to improve your. You want to really be in a situation where you are improving your financial situation with your money, reinvesting your earnings. Right. If I legitimately needed $100,000, and that was it was like have $100,000 next week, or I'll blow your brains out. I could go and get $100,000, no problem, cash. Right, no problem. I could do that in a week. Would I do that? No. Why would I do that? I would have to liquidate all of my assets, right? Why would I do that? All right, but you would be surprised. You give somebody a very small amount of money, $100,000, and you would be surprised by what they do. You could get them to do anything, which is ridiculous. Could you get me to do anything for money? No, you couldn't, right? I mean, because I don't care. In terms of money, it's kind of all just whatever to me. I can make as much money as I ever need. I make almost $350,000, $500,000 a year farming cattle on a 50-acre field. I can make as much money as I need. I don't. Money is borderline negligible to me. If I legitimately felt like I needed more money, I would just farm more land. I wouldn't go and do some ridiculous thing, but you would be surprised. And this is the kind of stuff that I am, surrounded by all the time. Oh, just worthless things. Oh my, people would legitimately sell their soul for 50 grand. You offer them a $50,000 check and they will just immediately sell their soul. You offer them $25,000, they'll immediately sell their soul. You offer them $100,000 and they will immediately sell their soul. But then the moment you tell them, if you want to make money forever, like if you actually want to learn how to fish, I can show you how to do it. It's just going to take a lot of commitment and a lot of time, and everybody just turns tail and runs. I don't understand, right? I mean, like, it's borderline moronic. I show it to you. I show you how to do it, and I do it for free. Nobody's paying me to do anything. I make plenty of money. All right, I don't need money. I'm not desperate for money in any way. I legitimately make such a large amount. I don't even know how much money I make. When I sell these 45 animals, I'll be selling 19 out of my 45 animals in the next month. And when I sell these animals, I'll probably make enough money to buy 34 animals, a load of grain, and a load of fertilizer and everything. I mean, I probably will have enough money to buy all that stuff. And I will have another, 27 animals ready for sale in 2 months. I make a massive amount. I don't even know how much money I make. I'm not worried about money. All right, I don't worry about money, okay? I don't worry about money. I worry about other things, right? Is my business, what direction is my business going? What do my cattle look like? What does my balance sheet look like? What kind of feed do I have the animals on? Do I anticipate I'll have any sort of biomass accumulation over the next month or two on my grass? That's the kind of stuff that I think about. But you would be surprised. But and I'm not saying this to be a malicious person, but because you have to understand that me, whatever, right? I make a large amount of money, okay? I make a large amount of money. I started the business by myself. I run the business by myself. I make a massive amount of money. I effectively make drastically more money than 99.99999% of the entire country. I can effectively start these businesses whenever I feel like it. All right, and my results are very good. But you would be surprised by the level of idiocy that I see. It's almost incredible. Like, I didn't even think that it was even possible. People will legitimately sell their soul for 50 grand. People will sell their soul for 100 grand. But then you tell them, I can show you how to make 5 times as much money. I can show you how to make 15 times this money. And you could do it by yourself. If you actually took the time and the effort to learn how to do it, you could actually do it. It's just going to take a long time, and it's going to take a long effort. And then it's like everybody quits. Nobody wants it anymore. I don't understand. That's ridiculous to me. I don't understand. It's like the level of idiocy I don't understand. And I'm not, when I say I don't understand, I'm not telling you to give me your worthless whatever. I don't care, all right? Trust me, I don't care. You could die tomorrow. Don't give me your opinion. I don't want to know. All right? But I don't understand. And I show you how to do all of this stuff, right? If you want to start a business, how do you do it? You should probably talk to an accountant about it too. You go and you start yourself an LLC, and you should probably talk to an accountant about it, okay? Find an accountant that specializes in your business, and then, and then ask them about, talk to them about your business, the amount of money that you're making. And if you're going to start a business, I would suggest that you make the money first, okay? You make the money first, and then you start your business. Don't start a business because you're desperate and you're delusional and you're going to throw a Hail Mary into the middle of nowhere. If you've actually found a way to make money, then start your business. Because, and I talk about this in terms of a reality sense, and I was even speaking about this yesterday. If you're in a situation where you're delusional and you're desperate, and you've decided that you're now going to throw a Hail Mary into the middle of nowhere, what's actually going to end up happening is that you are just, you will legitimately end up in a situation where you just get financially wrecked. Starting a business could be the worst idea you've ever had. It could be. Legitimately, it could be. You could legitimately end up in a situation where you are working 7 days a week. You're making no money. You're barely scraping to get by, and, you have all of these problems, and that could be how it turns out. All right, if you actually can make money, then start your business. If you've already made the money, then start your business, all right? Oh, I just made $75,000. Let me go and start my LLC and talk to my accountant about this money. Go and talk to your accountant about it then. Start your business. Oh, I just made $75,000. That's how I did it, right? I made about $90,000. I had about a $20,000 credit line. $30,000 credit line. I don't remember exactly, but you know, I made about $90,000, and then I started my business, right? I got my LLC. I called my accountant. I talked to my accountant about it, and I actually switched accountants since then. But that's how I did it, right? You know, that's when I got in contact with an accountant. I've actually switched my accountant since then, and that's how I did it. I made the money first, all right? And you know, and then you can talk about, you know, oh well, you know, I made $75,000, and it's, you know, and I have 4 months left in the year, and you know, if I have 4 months left in the year and I've made $75,000, how many assets do I need to buy? How many assets do I need to buy to reduce my tax burdens to zero? You can talk to your accountant about it, right? And then you can go with that information to the bank and take a loan and purchase your assets, or and you know me, I reinvest all of my cash, and I also take leverage on top of that, because if I legitimately need money, I can just liquidate 1 or 2 of my assets, right? If I'm sitting here with 180, you know, 170 cattle, if I need money, I can just liquidate one of my 170 animals. You know, 1 or 2 of my animals, it doesn't matter. All right. And when you take a look at my whole situation, you know, over the last 2 months, so this year I've run about 70 animals. Okay. I've run about 70 animals this year, and out of those 70, I've only lost 3. And I don't want to give myself bad juju, but that's what's happened so far. I've only lost 3 out of 70 animals. My death loss is very low, and my cost of gain is also very low. I had some good rain, and I have a lot of grass. I spent about $400 on my business over the last week, or not over the last week, over the last month. I've spent about $415 on my business over the last month, okay? Not the last week. I didn't spend any money in the last week. I didn't spend any. I bought a bale of alfalfa. That's what I bought over, and I bought a one bag of commodity pellets. You know, I spent whatever $45 on my business over the last week, but over the last 30 days, I've spent about $400. So this month I spent about $450, and I would reasonably anticipate that my earnings for the next even the next 2 weeks will be about $9,000. I will make about $9,000, $8,000 in the next 2 weeks. And 1 month after that, I will probably make another $28,000. So, you know, the whole thing about this is, you know, and when I reasonably, but when I take a look at the whole thing, the cost of running my business is actually going down. I've actually managed to reduce my expenses and increase my income at the same time. I've actually managed to do it by getting myself this lease property. I've actually managed to reduce the amount of money that my business costs and increase my revenue. All right, I've increased my revenue by maybe 35%, and I've decreased my expenses by about 35% as well. But decreasing my expenses, I don't really care about the expenses as long as they're not, you know, completely out of hand. You know, I probably spend about $1,200 a month on my business, and I make about $35,000 back. I make about $32,000 back. That's what my business actually is. I'm not giving you my opinion, and I'm not making this up. I spend about $1,200 a month on my business, and it makes me about $32,000 back. That $1,200 investment makes me about $32,000 back. All right, and I'm not making this up. And when I go and I buy this new piece of land, if I even decently like the land and I put the land under contract, I get better terms for it, right? You know, I've taken a look at a flood map on the property. It's not, you know, it's 95% of it is not in a flood zone. And the owner of the property has said that there's an aquifer under the property. And so the whole thing is that I will offer them their price if they give me the well, and then they give me a 5-month lease. And during that 5-month lease, I will get my financials squared away, and I will take my deal around to the other bankers, and I will talk to the bankers about my deal, and then I will get a loan. And if it comes down to it, I may legitimately just be able to write a check. I may be able to, you know, if it's $500,000, I may be able to just write a check. If it comes down to it, I may be able to do it. $500,000 is not a lot of money. I mean, you know, if I go and I take a look at my investments, you know, and I take a look at, how much equity I have, I may be able to just write a check. $500,000 is not a lot of money. $500,000 is a very small amount of money, especially when it comes to real estate. All right, you know, $500,000, you know, if $500,000 is not going to do anything. If you legitimately want if you legitimately think that $500,000 will save your life, then go to the bank and take a loan. You can take a loan for $500,000 and it'll cost you like $2,500, $3,000 a month, and then go and save yourself. Oh my God, if I just had $500,000, which is ridiculous to think about. Why would you even sit there and think? I don't ever say things like that, right? You know my business costs me about $1,500 a month to run, right? My business costs about $1,500 a month. All right, and for that money, I make about $32,000 back. I don't sit here and go, oh my God, if I just had $1 million, if I just had $500,000, the amount of money that it costs me to make money is almost negligible. Borderline negligible. It doesn't matter. The amount of money that it costs me to run my farm is borderline negligible. It does not matter. I put $1,200 into it and I get $32,000 back. When I have a lease property, I don't pay anything up front. I offer a dividend of the earnings. Right? I make the money and then I pay the landowner a percentage of the money that I make. I don't pay anything up front. Right? And if I pay a percentage of my earnings, why would I care about the percentage of my earnings? I don't care. I've already made the money. Why would I care? All right, and then just pay them their percentage, and then now I get to use their property and I don't have to pay for a mortgage or anything else. All right, it's very simple. I mean, it costs me about $1,200, maybe $1,500 a month to make about $32,000. All right, what's more important is that you actually learn how to farm. All right, you have to learn how to farm. Farming is not easy. All right, you have to actually learn how to farm, learn how to grow grass, learn how to run a business, learn how to run cattle. You have to actually learn how to do these things. If you have a bunch of opinions and you have nothing to show for it, and then you go off on your mystical, magical adventure, the only thing that will happen is you will wreck yourself. All right, you're not going to end up on a Disneyland adventure for the rest of your life. If you're delusional and you're desperate and you start a business and then you go and you start your business, your life is not going to turn into a magical adventure. You'll just end up wrecking yourself. That's what will happen. In all honesty, you will just end up wrecking yourself. Nobody cares. And I know that is very sad. But I don't, I don't know what else to tell you. It just is what it is. I mean, a majority of people get absolutely wrecked. Majority of people do, okay? Having some worthless, oh my God, well, I fell out of heaven a 7 and my opinions are important, and nobody cares. Either you can do it or you can't. And in reality, I actually do it. And when you take a look at my farm makes about $350,000, $500,000 a year. That's how much money I make right now. And my income is actually going up. I've already decided that I'm just going to reinvest all of my money. I'm not going to buy myself a Lamborghini. I'm not going to go and buy myself I'm just going to reinvest all of my money. I've already decided that is what I will do, right? I'm not going to buy myself a Lamborghini. I'm not going to go and buy myself whatever. I'm reinvesting all of my money back into my business. Over the next month, I will probably end up selling about 19 animals. When I sell these 19 animals, I will probably make enough money to buy 35. I will still have 26 animals at home. I can leverage against the earnings, and whatever it is that I decide to do, I can I can go and do it. And right now I'm taking a look at a property, and my whole idea with the property is to offer the landowner their price. I will give them their price, but I want better terms. I will give you the money that you want, but I want better terms. Give me a well and give me a 5-month lease. And if you do that, I will give you your price. That's the big idea. All right, that's the big idea for the deal in terms of the real estate. And I'm gonna go and take a look at that property this weekend on Sunday. And so that's it for me today, YouTube. You have a good one.